Welcome! I think I did the Psy thing again. Mio on MMA, talking about the Rakić versus Błachowicz card, coming up this weekend. Also, going to talk a little bit about the upcoming Bellator card. Just let me get the number here. The Venom Page versus Logan Storley card. Bellator 281. There we go. That's the number. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about the continual fallout from last weekend's pay-per-view. And I don't know, just kind of some interesting stuff from the main event. And also, Invicta 47 was yesterday. It was a pretty good card. So if you're interested in sort of a admittedly regional level show in terms of talent, go check it out. It was pretty good. I thought all the fights, to a degree outside of the Chelsea Chandler fight. And again, it's just more that Chandler kind of outmatches her opponents in Invicta physically, that I would like to see her move on to either trying for the PFL $1 million or going and trying to do something with the Bellator division that is actually probably a better featherweight division than the UFC's featherweight division, because the UFC's featherweight division is Norma Dumont and Macy Chasen, and maybe at some point Danielle Wolf. That's a little bit problematic. But anyways, I do think that there probably isn't enough good featherweight talent in the world on the women's scene to give us a UFC, a Bellator, and an Invicta division, and a PFL division that are actually competent. I think there's probably, honestly, one division's worth of girls at that weight right now. That might change, that might become better, and it would probably become better if the UFC actually treated it like a division, as opposed to their current thing, which is our champion at 145 is a 135er, and most of the people fighting her are also probably, honestly, probably capable, probably should be making 135, depending on your thoughts on weight cutting. So there is that problem. But the rest of the card was pretty good. And let's talk about the hoopla coming out of the UFC last weekend, the pay-per-view. So first up, there's the Charles Oliveira stuff. Now, I'm going to say this. I like Charles Oliveira. I simultaneously think I'm a fan of Charles Oliveira, but at the same time, totally understand he's the most beatable champion and that there are flaws. Because let's face it, the man gets dropped pretty much every fight he's in the first round. He has, to be honest, I just attribute it to bad eyesight as far as being able to find range, comfort level, and so on. He sort of has to find the range by getting smashed, and that happens. He gets dropped. Obviously, there's a chance to win the fight. Like it or not, it doesn't matter who he's in there with, as long as they're a reasonably big hitter, there is going to be that chance to win. So he's always going to be inherently more beatable than someone like a Alexander Volkanovski, who we don't see in trouble ever, or a Kamaru Usman, who we very rarely see in trouble, or a even it is Adesanya, who has like a tremendous area that we think can be made a problem, specifically that he probably still is not a particularly great wrestler. If you can find your range, if you can find your shot range, if you can find a way to suck him into a wrestling battle, you can probably get that done. But that involves you being a high-profile wrestler. Whereas with Oliveira, it's like, okay, we've seen him rocked by guys who are not actually super known for having the deepest striking game or even necessarily the most powerful hands. It just feels like it doesn't matter who he fights, that option is open. And I find myself sort of in a middle ground with Islam Makhachev, because that's going to play a role in this, in the sense that, do I believe Islam Makhachev should get the next title shot? Yes. If we're saying right now, with no other number one contender fighter or whatever to be booked, like if Charles was fighting, not next month obviously, but let's say August, maybe, or September, who would be getting that title shot? I think it has to be Makhachev, because who else is really going to have it? And now people are going to be like, Makhachev's resume is not very good, is not worth the title shot, Charles Oliveira was better when he got title. Doesn't matter. I mean this very seriously, is that anytime we're talking about a number one contender, we're talking about their resume as opposed to the other candidates to get the title fight. I'll give an example. Back at UFC 56, Paul Buentello got a title shot against Andrei Arlovski off of beating Justin Eilers. That was not a very impressive win. Eilers is a flawed fighter and everything that goes with that. It was not the most amazing resume. But there wasn't a better one available at the time. It was kind of dark days of heavyweight in the UFC when there just was a very thin division. Frank Mir had been in his motorcycle accident. He was out. We had just seen Tim Sylvia versus Andrei Arlovski, so that was not really a terribly fresh idea in the fight realm. We were seeing the fading of kind of like the old guard, the Cabbages, the Pedro Hizos, the Rico Rodriguez's, the Randy Couture was gone, Josh Barnett was gone, or Randy was at Randy wasn't gone, he was at 205, but Randy's at 205, Barnett is gone, Randleman is gone, Coleman is gone, so there wasn't really a lot of options. And that's the thing, is it doesn't matter what Charles Oliveira had to do to get his title shot. That doesn't impact what Makhachev has to do, because that's the thing, is what fresh opponent brings a better resume than Makhachev to fighting Charles? Now, if Charles is fighting in December, which is the plan, I would do Makhachev versus Dariush. The winner of that fight gets the title shot, because that enscounces one of them as much, much more of an impressive contender for the belt. But that's if you have time. And I think that's probably what the UFC will end up doing if they indeed give Oliveira his wish to fight in December. Because, I mean, that's just a lot of time not to have a high-line 155 fight, impacting the title. Anyways, what this goes into is that there is an argument going on right now within the MMA fandom, really just pertaining to Charles Oliveira, just period. Like, there are people who are claiming he's the GOAT versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think that argument is fairly silly. I do believe that Khabib's record is an inflated record. I do believe that when people are like, he's, whatever it is, I can't believe that I've forgotten what Khabib's record is, but it's 20-something, and Khabib Nurmagomedov, please give me the record. I can't believe I'm forgetting this. It's actually kind of disappointing. Yeah, okay, 29 and 0. I know it was like somewhere in there. All right, 29 and 0. Sure, the 29 and 0 is highly inflated. Pretty much everyone he fought before he got to the UFC, other than Shambalat Shambalaev, is not a particularly amazing fighter, and a lot of his UFC fights were kind of just filler fights. They were not ranked fighters. That being said, he still is like 8-0 against UFC ranked fighters, I believe. He still did win the belt. He still did more or less beat the best of the best available at the time, with the exception of Tony Ferguson, obviously. Can't really think of anyone else that he's even really missing from his resume. He beat Poirier. He beat Gaethje. He beat RDA. So I don't know who's missing from that resume particularly. And the other thing is that people point towards the filler. Okay, well, we're debating Charles Oliveira. His only notable win before he got to the UFC was Alexander Bazeha, which is a pretty even fight with Shambalaev when you think about it. They were both guys who fought predominantly a weight class below where we're talking about, and both made it to Bellator. Both had good runs there. Both had some good wins. Like, they're both actually very good wins. And I will say that probably Bazeha on a stylistic level is a more dangerous fight for Oliveira than Shambalaev, who has a really bad takedown defense game, is for Khabib. But still, it's a fairly even resume at that point. And like it or not, yeah, Khabib didn't lose. We've seen Charles Oliveira lose 8 times. That's going to impact things. That's going to put things into perspective in a way that favors Khabib. And then we go into Charles's kind of poorly executed attempt to get a fight with Conor or with Nate Diaz, which is kind of the final part of this, is that, number one, Charles made what I think is the most common cardinal mistake that UFC fighters make after they win a fight, which is to say the immortal words, "I'll fight anyone. I'll fight whoever the UFC puts in front of me." You can't do that and then angle for a fight with someone specific. And that's the thing, is he's like, oh, Islam's not worthy. I would like to fight Nate Diaz or Conor McGregor. Here's the problem. Now, people have defended this by saying he's not saying Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz are worthy. He's just saying that Islam isn't. Okay, but if the reason not to give Makhachev a title shot is that he's not worthy, but I'll fight these guys without the stipulation that it's not for the title, then you are, by implication, saying that Diaz and Conor are worthy of a title shot. And right now, no. Possibly never. Because I do actually kind of think both guys are kind of shot. I'm not saying the UFC won't do Charles versus Conor. I said that in my recap of this event. I fully expect that that is something that the UFC is going to be thinking about. 100%. Because Conor is a moneymaker. Despite the fact that I've always compared Conor McGregor as the UFC's like version of The Undertaker from WWE. And I know people don't like the pro wrestling MMA crossovers a lot. But it has to be said that, like The Undertaker, Conor McGregor doesn't need a belt to actually be relevant. Any fight that you book Conor McGregor in will probably sell. That's why I've always rejected the idea when people are like, oh, you got to rush him to the belt because that's the big money fight, blah, blah, blah. No. The argument, frankly, and the numbers prove this, that Conor McGregor is, with or without the belt, a money fight. And believe it doesn't give me any joy to say that because I've never really understood the Conor McGregor appeal. But I also can't deny that it 100% exists. So just do Conor against a somewhat ranked fighter and you have yourself a moneymaker. Personally, I would go Michael Chandler. I said that in my recap of the pay-per-view. That I think that is where you go with that. And then you go... Again, if Oliveira is going to fight in December, then you do Makhachev, Dariush, winner gets that shot. Boom, there you go. That's how the lightweight division should play out, in my opinion. Obviously, you can disagree. That's the beauty of this fandom. It's the beauty and the horror of this fandom. The horror being that like a lot of the fandom is not really based on anything logical or consistent. Moving on, though, we also had Pat Barry. Officially, it was just Pat Barry, but like Thug Rose also was there talking on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani. So, this interview was kind of painful to watch, and I don't necessarily recommend it. But if you're really interested in the situation, go check it out. In short, Pat Barry believes they executed the perfect game plan for fighting Carlos Esparza. Now, there are two reasons I think that this is ridiculous. Number one is the fact that they lost. If you lose, and it's a fight that you should win, I should be clear of that. If I was to fight, I guess I'm right now I could probably make 205. So let's probably couldn't make 185. Had made 185 in the past. But let's say I were to take a fight now, fight at 205, come up with the absolute perfect game plan for fighting Yuri Prochazka, I'd still get murdered. But we're talking about Thug Rose, UFC strawweight champion, in a fight. If you're the champion and you execute a perfect game plan, I have to ask why you lost. Now, I will say this. I thought Rose, insofar as there has to be a winner because the rounds have to be scored 10-9, did in fact win the fight. But at the same time, I also have no problem with Carlo winning because that was a terrible, 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 terrible fight. And I do think that Rose was much, much more the problem. And the reason is point number 2. Thug Rose has gone out there and fought relatively aggressive, relatively exciting styles of fights against people like Jessica Andrade, Joanna and Jacek Weili-Zhang. These are 4 strawweights anyways, incredibly physically imposing fighters that are incredibly dangerous with a lot of power behind their punches, the ability to slam people and so on. They made reference to getting slammed on her head numerous times as a reason that they went with this very low-key plan. Problem is that's not Carlos Esparza. Carlos Esparza, by the standards of a top strawweight and a title contender in the division, is incredibly non-threatening to your health and safety. This does not mean that she can't win. This does not mean that she isn't a good fighter. but she's a good fighter in the sense that she is a crafty wrestler. She is a deceptively better than it appears striker, and she has a pretty good back take game, and she will rear naked choke people quite a bit. But if you look at her at her record, I should have had this up before. My apologies. My second big mistake of the day. But if we look at Carla Esparza's record, courtesy of Tapology, she has, I want to say, never knocked somebody out. And I'm looking for an answer that makes me incorrect on this. There is a win over Lynn Alvarez by strikes that doesn't state whether it's a knockout. And similarly, there's a win over Sarah Schneider. I'm not really recalling either of those fights. Could that have been a knockout? Maybe, but I suspect it was a TKO. And if you look at her UFC record, rear naked choke against Rose, decision against Juliana Lima, decision against Marina Moroz, decision against Cynthia Calvillo, decision against Verna Jandaroba, decision against Alexa Grasso, decision against Michelle Watterson, decision against Marina Rodriguez, and a ground and pound crucifix stoppage of Jean and Yan. And Yan was fine. Because it wasn't like a super scary knockout. It was, I have you in crucifix. I'm going to throw relatively light shots, but you're not going to be able to defend them. You're not going to be able to move. And eventually the referee is going to step in and stop the fight. Esparza is not a threatening fighter for that. If they are against Carla Esparza, that worried about Thug Rose's mental health, physical health, well-being, etc., she should not be fighting. That's the thing I have always said, is that there is nothing wrong with not wanting to get punched in the face by anyone, and that includes Carla Esparza. But that is not something that should be the case when you have this as a job. And the whole thing really just brings Pat Barry's entire coaching into question. Someone asked on Twitter, and I answered, and they liked it, and whatever, that, like, does he own the game plan? This kind of the weird thing is, he absolutely owns the game plan, but he doesn't own that he made a mistake. He still thinks he made the right call by emphasizing this game plan. And we, of course, got into the weird weeds of better dead than red, and also just the nature of the Pat Barry relationship with Thug Rose. They met when she was 18. They eventually started dating. I don't know when. You know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know the story from there. It's grooming. It's basically a grooming accusation because there's a 13-year age difference. I've always said this. In gym dating, in my opinion, and it's just an opinion, is not a very good idea, because when does the dating end and we get a good story out of it? Like, almost always, the dating ends and somebody's career is tremendously negatively impacted. As I'm gonna take a quick drink here. And that's why I would avoid it. Personally. If you find your one true love off of it, and you get married, you have kids, and you're together into your 80s, okay, fine, it worked out. But the percentages of relationships that go there, kind of low. I don't know. It seems to have worked out for some people. Roxanne Modaffari, for example, Lauren Murphy, have seemingly had perfectly solid relationships in regards to this. But this Pat Barry one, this is not the Antonina Shevchenko marries her coach type thing, where, like, my understanding, and I could be wrong, is like she was very much a kid when they met, and that's just creepy as shit. So this is not on that level. But like, I think the other thing is that you got to think that Rose has talked about an abusive background and so on, so that makes this whole thing very, very weird. Am I saying that this is a terrible relationship that needs to be ended now? No. Beyond the age gap, I haven't been shown anything that says that Pat Barry is doing anything inappropriate. So there is that. But it does definitely seem like their coaching relationship should come to an end. She should probably just have Trevor Whitman in the corner. And there have been some suggestions that Trevor Whitman off of this fight is just not that good of a coach. I don't know about that. I'm kind of open to the idea that Whitman admittedly does seem to be kind of like a bit of a finishing coach, but like one that somewhat takes away some of the old things that you used to do really well. There is that possibility. But what I would say is that we haven't seen someone fail completely under Whitman that succeeded elsewhere. And this fight, I chalk up more to Pat Barry because in the corner, Whitman was trying to talk about technical things that we can do differently. Barry was like, everything's good, everything's great, don't change a thing. And that's why, essentially, I look at this fight as being entirely Pat Barry's fault. This was a fight that, after the second time Carla tried to take her down and got just thrown off, that Rose should have just turned it up. And probably got the finish. That's basically it. So let's move on to the fight card. So we got, obviously in the main event, we got Alexander Rakić. We got Jan Błachowicz. It's an interesting fight. Admittedly, last time Rakić had to step up against someone who could strike on a really good level. In Volkan Oezdemir, he kind of gassed himself out, ended up losing that fight. Since then, he's beaten Anthony Smith and an admittedly flawed Thiago Santos at this point. Like, Santos's knees are just kind of absolutely shot, and his ability to counter wrestle is pretty much non-existent. So, like, I don't really take that. I don't take anyone beating him at this point as like a particularly amazing sign for them. Now, if you stand, bang, knock out Santos, that's probably still worth something, but there are just so many avenues to beating Thiago Santos at this point that it doesn't really matter that much. So am I entirely sold on Rakić? No, coming into this fight. Now, that being said, a lot of Blachowicz' success comes from the fact that he usually has a reach advantage and ability to control the outside striking game. Rakić is 2 inches taller than him. Now, granted, Rakić supposedly has the same reach, but I just refuse to believe that. This could be one of those cases where, like, fingertip to fingertip, they're the same, but the effective reach that can actually be employed in a fight is actually very much in Rakic's favor. And that does give me a lot of pause. Like, does Blachowicz' game function super well if he's not able to establish jab dominance, if he's not able to establish dominance with leg kicks and kicks to the body? Rakić is also probably notably faster than him. Błachowicz has never been like the most physical fighter, and as he ages, that's something that probably is going to be in decline. And Rakić is really a physical specimen. So I've kind of gone back and forth on this fight a number of times. Do I trust the old veteran who's kind of proven to be able to adapt and find weaknesses in a game? Or do I trust the young kid who I question his ability to really adapt and not be super one-tracked with his fighting mind? Because, again, the Anthony Smith win that he had was absolutely dominant and impressive. But it also showed, like, just a one-track mind to him. Like, it was very much, I'm going to wrestle you over and over and over again. And I'm going to kind of ignore the opportunities and the openings that are presented along the way to do anything but wrestle. And that does concern me a little bit. I think when it comes down to it, it's a fight that I might honestly change my mind before the fight. So, unlike usual with the main event, this is not necessarily a final pick. I could totally see myself changing my mind. But right now, I am feeling that Rakić can probably do this. Because I think that if Rakić is one-track mind to be kind of a range kickboxer, to hang back, to utilize his reach, to utilize his speed, he can get this done. And it does seem like he's not gassing anymore. The threat, again, he lost largely to Volkan Oezdemir from gassing. Can he not do that this time? I'm sorry, I have a random stuffy nose. Man, I don't know if I want to pick Rakić, but like I'm feeling like I do. I'm feeling like that I don't necessarily trust Jan without dominance at the outside range. He obviously beat Israel Adesanya without that, but he did that through kind of like raw size, strength, fighting a middleweight while being a 205er, and he doesn't have that here. Rakić is very strong and very big. I think Rakić is actually the bigger fighter of the two. Wow. Then, of course, there is the thought of, like, does Rakić just try to wrestle him, though? Has that become his identity? And, of course, there was the Reyes fight where, like, a lot of these same questions did kind of come up, and he passed that with flying colors. You know what? Nope. You know what? I've convinced myself. Jan Błachowicz to win this fight. Rakić becomes predictable down the stretch. Błachowicz starts to find homes for his counter game, his body game, his jab, and he gets a 3rd or 4th round TKO. That's what I'm going with, and I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to stick with that, even though my brain is probably going to be screaming at me, like, up until the fight that, like, I'm wrong, and I need to rethink this. I'm going to go with that. Ryan Spawn versus Ion Cutelaba. Going with Cutelaba. I've never bought into Spawn. I've never, if I'm being honest, bought into Cutelaba either. But I've never bought into Spawn in a way that I don't think he's functional at any point in the fight. Realistically. Like, he is big. He's powerful. He's athletic. He is, I want to say 6'5". Yeah, he's 6'5" with an 81.5-inch reach, which just inherently is going to give him some options. But at the same time, he's skittish. He's a little panicky when pressured. He's a little panicky when things go wrong for him. He's defensively completely open. And, like, I think being a panicky person when things are going bad, when you're taking damage, and being bad defensively is just a entirely incorrect combination to make a fighter out of. It's kind of similar to, like, when he fought Johnny Walker, where I have no real faith in Johnny Walker. But I have faith in Johnny Walker. Well, actually, after the Thiago Santos fight, I don't think I even have faith in Johnny Walker to do what I'm going to say he can do. But I have faith in Johnny Walker to be dangerous for the start of the fight. That's kind of the same place I am with Ion Cutelaba. I am confident that Cutelaba, through his mad insanity and anger and fearlessness, frankly, is going to get in Spawn's face. He's going to pressure him. He's going to make him react to him. And he's probably going to knock him out. Because Spawn doesn't respond very well to that. Spawn doesn't have great defense. Spawn doesn't have a great chin. That's a really, really bad resume that, like, is kind of saved by the fact that, again, he's 6'5" and has an 81.5-inch reach. And just a lot of people look across from him and kind of, like, aren't going to realize I just have to, like, not just bull rush him, because you got to be more tactical about it than that. There's got to be some idea for defense. There's got to be some idea for how to put damage on him. But Cutelaba is that kind of insane. And we'll probably get this job done. But at the same time, I'm going to say this. It's also 100% possible that Ion Cutelaba goes out there, does exactly what I'm saying, and gets caught by some flailing counter punch from Ryan Spawn. So it's not a safe pick. But I don't see Spawn making a win out of this fight. I see Spawn, I don't want to say get lucky, because getting lucky implies, like, not attempting to or whatever. I see Spawn winning by something that isn't necessarily a tactical decision on his part, but rather the malignant chaos that is an MMA fight, and particularly a 205 fight. Whereas Cutelaba, I see creating the win. Louis Smolka versus Davey Grant. I've never really had a lot of belief in Louis Smolka at 135, because I think a lot of what he did at 125 was just be the big man. He's a 5'9" flyweight, which is huge. At bantamweight, it's still pretty big, but it's not as big. He's, I believe, taller than Davey Grant, because I think, yeah, Grant is 5'8", so he's an inch taller, but he actually has a half-inch reach disadvantage. Davey Grant is the type of guy that I don't think you can just bully. I don't think you can go out there and just, like, be like, I'm big, I'm going to pressure you, I'm going to do that, and it's going to work. It hasn't really worked for anybody. Davey Grant is, in his own way, a plenty flawed fighter, in the sense that I don't think he has really a lot of ways to dominate a fight, to impose his will on the fight. He's not necessarily an amazing striker. He's not necessarily an amazing grappler. He's not necessarily an amazing wrestler, but he's an amazing scrapper. And he isn't going to be put away by that kind of thing. Additionally, I think maybe Grant's stock took a hit immediately after losing to Chito Vera. But then Chito Vera went out there and demolished Rob Font. And I think that by extension has really raised Grant's stock. And then sure, he lost to Adrian Yanez. But Adrian Yanez is a pretty good up-and-coming fighter in his own right and has a lot of physical talent. Something Smoke has never really had. Like, Smoke is not super fast, not super powerful. He's just kind of strong, big, and he puts a high pace on people. He breaks you with pace, just raw volume and output. And it's not really worked at bantamweight. If you look at his record at bantamweight, the wins are wins that you should get. They're Ryan McDonald, Sumudarji, who I think will be a really good fighter. Like, I really actually do think Sumudarji is going to be a pretty good prospect going forward, and indeed has piled up 3 straight wins after the loss. But he still has like things to learn and adjust to, despite the fact that at the time, like, it's weird to say that a guy who's in his 17th pro fight still has a lot to learn and adjust to, but Sumudarji still does even after that. And then, beating Ryan McDonald. Ryan McDonald's just not very good. And then he was losing to Alberto Quinones. And that's an immensely bad sign, because Quinones, beyond being like a reasonable physical specimen, just isn't very good. And I don't think after struggling with Quinones that you're going to beat Davey Grant. I don't really think so. That being said, Grant's lost 2 in a row. Where is he mentally? I don't know. I think he's still probably in the fight game, though. He seems like a real tough guy in that regard. Not immune to self-doubt or anything. I think we saw that on The Ultimate Fighter actually quite a bit, that he does deal with self-doubt, but he conquers it and moves forward. And I think that's a good thing for a fighter. So yeah, I'm taking Davey Grant by decision. He could finish Mocha. He could hurt him with a punch and, club and sub or a TK or anything like that. But I do think Smoke is also super tough, and I've never been particularly inspired by Grant as a finisher. So it probably goes the distance, and yeah, I'm taking Davey Grant to win that fight. Caitlin Chukagian versus Amanda Hebus. I have to go with Chukagian, I think. 6 inches taller. Apparently just 2 inches of reach, which I think is kind of ridiculous. Chukagian is not the most exciting fighter to watch. She's not the most venomous fighter. But she's really big. Like, she was a fairly large size bantamweight, came down to flyweight, and she's just really big. And Hebus is, to be honest, I think more of a strawweight when it comes down to it. I don't think she's hopeless at 125. I think she's got a fair amount of power and everything. And obviously we did see Jessica Andrade come up from 115 and destroy Caitlin Chukagian. But even Andrade was given slight pause by the frame of Chukagian. And Hebus is not Andrade in terms of the raw physicality. I do think she's actually a better put together technical fighter. Because I've always said this, that I think Andrade, for a top-end title contending fighter who will probably be in the title contention for most of her career, is actually remarkably flawed technically, but just makes up with it for physicality. So Hebus is, in that regard, a better fighter. But Hebus does not have the physicality of Andrade. She doesn't have the explosiveness. She doesn't have the power. She doesn't have the strength. She is very strong. She is explosive. She is fast and so on, but it's not at that level. Very, very few people are. Andrade is a physical freak. So the idea that Andrade was able to do what Hebus is going to probably have to try to do to Chukagian is of little inspiration to me when it comes to breaking this fight down. I just think that, like, I wish I could, really make this a really interesting technical breakdown of this fight. Be like, this is going to be a chess match. There's going to be this and this. But like, it honestly kind of just comes down to the fact that Chookagian is super long. And she's pretty good at doing it. And she's pretty strong at resisting wrestling and implementing her own clinch wrestling game. So like, what is Hebus going to do? She's going to have to get inside. And if she gets inside, she might just end up in Chookagian's clinch. And Chookagian's pretty good at that. Chookagian's kind of like a reduced version of Holly Holm in a large way. Although better at finding range than Holly Holm. Holly Holm has actually always been like kind of notoriously bad at finding range. Chookagian's not that bad. But and the thing is, it's probably even more effective for Chookagian because she's a weight class lower down. And like, I think has a pretty similar reach to Holly Holm. It's just a lot of volume, not necessarily with a ton of power, although she has been better about sitting down on some strikes lately. And a really strong, hard to dominate clinch. And that just, unfortunately, is something that, unless you have that Andrade level physicality, is kind of hard to overcome. And it shows that, like, despite me never really having a tremendous amount of nice things to say about Chookagian, she has beaten Jennifer Maia twice. She has beaten Vivian Araujo. She has beaten Cynthia Calvillo. The Cynthia Calvillo fight, I think, is the one that like actually fits this one the best. Although Calvillo is also woefully inept from a fight IQ standpoint. I don't think Amanda Hebus is. So yeah, it's just that like Hebus doesn't have the traits that have historically beaten her. Because Chookagian's 4 losses are to Liz Carmouche, who's very, very strong and similarly sized. Jessica Ai, who has a ton of problems that I won't get into here, but is very physical. Valentina Shevchenko, who is basically a combat goddess. And Andrade, who we talked about. So, yeah, I'm going by Chookagian to win a decision here. And then we're going to move on to Frank Camacho versus Manuel Torres, which is another fight that I don't have a ton to say about. And the reason I don't have a ton to say about that is mostly Manuel Torres. Torres has got a lot of super fast finishes, but they're over people that it doesn't really mean a ton to do that too. This is the problem with someone who's coming up with a predominant aspect is I can knock people out. Is that we don't really get a feel from him as a fighter. Like, I don't honestly feel what Torres is yet, which is weird because he does have 14 fights and I've seen a fair amount of them. It's not like I've seen like 1 or 2 fights and I'm trying to base it off that. It's like, it's just that like a lot of what he's done is just, I destroy people in the first round. Now, the bright side for Torres in this fight is that Frank Camacho is historically a pretty slow starter. Especially at 155. I wonder if it's a weight cut thing, maybe. He's 5'10". He could probably just fight it. He should, honestly, just fight at welterweight. That would probably be a pretty reasonable idea. Because he's, kind of an action fighter, but like, nuked by Justin James. All right, Justin James is a heavy hitter and everything, but it's still not a great sign. Submitted in the first round by Beneil Dariush. Again, not really a problem, but again, came out kind of slow. Beat Nick Hine. Second round knockout there. Knocked out by Jeff Neal. Got hurt really badly in the first round of his fight with Drew Dober, and then like it just went to a decision. And then like had a hard time with like Damian Brown and stuff. So it's that cold start that I just can't get over. Like Torres is a hot starter. Torres is, if nothing else about his 14 fight career up until this point has meant anything, it is that he is very dangerous in round 1. That he does start fast and that he does hit hard. And if Camacho is going to start slow, similar to the Justin James fight, he's going to get lit up, and it's going to be a question of can he survive, or is he going to get finished? Like, is it going to be the Dober fight, or is it going to be the Justin James fight? I'm kind of leaning towards it being the Justin James fight. I like Frank Camacho, I really do. I do kind of wonder if it, like, again, if it really would just be better to go back to 170 and kind of be an action fighter. He'd be small at 170, don't get me wrong, but like his chin seems much better at 170 than it does at 155. It does seem like the weight cut takes the chin out of him. And I think he needs that weight. I think he needs that I think he needs that chin. Is what it comes down to. So yeah, I'm going with Manuel El Loco Torres, although he does seem very, very small for lightweight. He's apparently 5'10", which is a decent height, but he's like a very lean 5'10". So I do wonder if like 145 is an option, but at the same time, I also really don't like suggesting fighters cut extreme amounts of weight. And I do also kind of wonder if like his style is just inherently probably better off being the faster guy. Jake Hadley versus Alan Nascimento. Okay, this fight I'm interested in. So my associate, Robbie Scott, has been talking up Jake Hadley for quite some time. To me, he's a big believer in Jake Hadley. And I'm a fairly big believer in Jake Hadley. I actually think he is the better long-term prospect than Alan Nascimento, because I do believe Alan Nascimento, as shown in his losses, kind of has a flaw that I think will prevent him from really contending in the UFC. And that is that he's incredibly willing to play guard. And that is the best aspect of his game. And just guard grapplers in general in the UFC have not had the greatest run of success, because MMA judging is still very much about kind of wrestling-centric aggression. And they will, if you don't get the stoppage while playing the guard game, you will probably lose a decision. And that was kind of the story of Nascimento's UFC debut against Tadger Ulanbekov, where Ulanbekov probably was getting out-grappled, probably was being put in more danger, probably was being out-scrambled, but he was on top. And that more or less led to him getting the win. Whereas Hadley, I really actually do kind of like his striking game put together. It's a good pressuring game. It's really good when he's going forward. It's not as great when he's put on the back foot. And he does also have a very good ground game of his own. He does seem very, very comfortable on the ground. The reason, though, that I hesitate to instantly be like, okay, well, I think one guy is a better fighter for the UFC long term. So obviously I'm picking Hadley, right? No, I'm picking Nascimento. The reason is that Hadley's game is not that of a game of a guy who's just going to strike, who's going to pass up opportunities to be on the ground in a theoretically good position, and Nascimento is going to give him those opportunities. Nascimento is going to play guard, basically. That's his game. That's his game. And I don't know that Hadley doesn't... I don't know that Hadley has the ability to be like, I'm just not going to go there. That kind of... I don't want to say fear, because I think it's the wrong word to describe it, but that willingness to appear afraid. There we go. To appear like, I don't want to go into that guard. I'm scared of that guard. That guard is better than me. That guard is hot lava. I think he's going to go into it. And I think actually, because he was put into some locations of trouble in some of the fights that he's had previously against grapplers who are not really anywhere near the ilk of Alan Nascimento, means that Alan Nascimento is probably going to sub him. That's my prediction. But I wouldn't be surprised if it went the other way, just because, like I said, Nascimento, number one, has a style that is definitively going to lose him pretty much any close decision that he's in. And his stand-up is kind of not very good. We'll put it that way. We'll put it that way. But I do think he's going to submit Jake Hadley here. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited for this fight. This is one of the fights I'm really looking forward to. Viviana Araujo versus Andrea KGB Lee. I think KGB Lee is the better put together technical fighter. I've said this about KGB Lee a number of times, and I was actually pretty surprised that she beat Cynthia Calvillo relatively recently, because I thought Calvillo would physically be too much for her. But winning by the corner stoppage, that's a big deal. Of course, also having beaten Antonia Shevchenko, and before that, she did have that 3-fight losing streak to Roxanne Modaffari, Lauren Murphy, and Joanne Calderwood. All of those are pretty good. All of those were pretty close fights as well, it should be said. And then for Viviana Araujo, she's coming off the loss to the aforementioned Caitlin Chikagian, while beating Roxanne Modafferi, Montana De La Rosa. In many ways, both of them have like very similar best wins of Montana De La Rosa, just because Cynthia Calvillo has been so hit and miss. So the question here I have is like, okay, Araujo is super powerful. I think she's a beast. I do think KGB Lee, well, I don't have the same thought that a lot of people, like a lot of people think KGB Lee is actually kind of like a subpar athlete. I don't think that. I think she's an above average athlete. I think she has physicality in the clinch. I think she has speed. But Araujo is the more physically dominant fighter here. I think if they clinch up, Lee's going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening. I think Araujo's going to have that massive strength. What are the odds on this? I'm actually kind of interested. About near even. Plus 100 for Araujo, minus 120 for KGB Lee. All right, no, I'm on board with that. Like I said, I think Lee is the cleaner striker of the two. I think she's the cleaner grappler of the two. I think she's the cleaner clincher of the two. I just think that Araujo also has that raw X factor that Conor Rebush calls it. The athletes are cheaters in MMA. They don't have to develop necessarily great skills to complement it. And it's that Jessica Andrade thing. It's like, not to the same degree, because I think, number one, I think Araujo is actually a more technically put together fighter than Andrade is. And I don't think she's on the same physical level. But she glosses over a lot of things with just that raw power and athleticism. That being said, I'm gonna take KGB Lee. The win over Calvillo kind of has won me over, that she can handle people who are pretty good athletes. I think she can outwork, outvolume, be creative at striking distance, outside at range, and get the job done. And it's gonna have to be by decision, because there's no way that she finishes Araujo. I don't think that happens. Has Araujo ever been finished? Granted, it's only a 13 fights sample size, but she was by Sarah Frota back in 2017. Okay. I always forget that first loss. Mostly because Sarah Frota's career was supposed to be was pretty hyped. Pretty damn hype for like a while. And then she got to the UFC, lost to Lavina Souza, lost to Jillian Robertson, got cut, lost to Diana Torquato, and then lost to Ayesem Lucindo, and has won a recent fight. But at the age of 35 does feel kind of out of things, so to speak. That the hype didn't really ever come home to roost. So yeah, I'm going to go with KGB Lee to have the better game plan, to have the hustle, to have, kind of her signature thing. She's a great worker, and she finds ways to win the clinch battle against people that are even possibly physically stronger than her, possibly even better in the clinch than her. So yeah, I'm gonna go with that. But it would not surprise me to see Araujo go out there, come out, throw a big punch, get a big connection. They rush the clinch, and Araujo just overpowers KGB Lee, and I'll be like, oh, crap. I am totally wrong. But that's a totally wrong that I can live with. Whereas I'm going to feel bad if Araujo goes out there, gets outworked, gets taken to a decision by KGB Lee, and I picked her to win the fight. I'm going to feel worse about that. Michael Johnson, Alan Patrick. Why is Michael Johnson still in the UFC? That's my honest question. I'm not exactly far off when I'm talking about Alan Patrick either. But because Patrick's on himself like a 3-fight winless streak, the no contest with Mason Jones, losses to Bobby Green and Scott Holtzman. But that's the thing is, in a nutshell, losing to Bobby Green's not really a problem. Losing to Scott Holtzman's actually not really all that much of a problem. Scott Holtzman's a deceptively good fighter. But watching how Michael Johnson has been losing lately, he's had no answers. He really has not had answers for kind of very simple questions. Clay Guida, Thiago Moises, Stevie Ray. I'll give you Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett hits like a fucking truck. But when your last win is a 2018 win over Artem Lobov and then like a split decision victory over Andre Fili. I can't pick Michael Johnson. He might still win. He's a better put together fighter on a good day than Patrick. He's got good kickboxing. He's got good counter wrestling. He's fast. He flows. He just also utterly gets destroyed by his own corner's overly critical nature because he's got Henry Hooft in his corner. He doesn't necessarily have the massive level of confidence that you need to really make Henry Hooft as a corner work. So I don't know. Alan Patrick's just not very good. He's very physical and he likes taking people down and he likes to bully them. And that's kind of the problem, is I think that's exactly how you beat Michael Johnson. Alan Patrick. Decision, maybe a rear naked choke, maybe ground and pound. I don't know. He's also 38 years old. It's a 38-year-old versus a 35-year-old. There's absolutely a chance that they just kind of self-destruct. Angela Overkill Hill. Verna Jandiroba. The dynamic in this fight is pretty simple. Jandiroba is a very, very, very good grappler. Pretty good takedown artist also for a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter. The only people who have beaten her are Carla Esparza, who's a very, very good wrestler. Mackenzie Dern, who's a very, very good grappler. And Amanda Ribas, who we talked about before, is a just very good fighter, very good athlete. Angela Hill is on a very big downturn, having lost to Tisha Torres and Amanda Lemos. But Torres and Lemos both offer way more varied attacks. Like, both can strike. Like, at the end of the day, Lemos is probably most comfortable being a grappler. And Torres kind of always wants to grapple, kind of always wants that to be her way to victory, but she's a striker by trade, very creative. And that's the thing is, I don't really know if you can beat Angela Hill by just doing one thing. It's not really something she's particularly lost to in her career. Like Claudia Gadelha is another good example of like someone who, sure, grappling's the A game, but can strike. Same with Michelle Watterson, John Yan, Ronda Marcos. I guess you could argue Nina Nunez is kind of really one-dimensional. It's kind of about it, though. Yeah, if Angela Hill is to win this, is to lose this fight, it would be just kind of like by a way that we haven't really seen. Like, I think Hill's going to know that Jandiroba is coming in, is going to want to take the fight to the ground. Or Jandiroba, pardon me. She's going to come in, she's going to try and work her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game, and that's kind of it. Like, her striking's getting better. Her striking now versus her striking when she came into the UFC is actually notably better, but like, Angela Hill is going to be the better striker. Angela Hill is going to be probably the better clinch fighter. She's really hard to have your way with in the clinch. Ask Luma Lugbume. Ask Amanda Lemos. And yeah, I think she's going to win. I always say this whenever it's an Angela Hill fight. I'm in the bag for Angela Hill. I'm a big fan. And that kind of happens. It's one of those few times where like maybe my fandom gets in the way. But I don't think I've ever really gotten an Angela Hill fight like inherently incorrect. I'm not saying like, you know, my picks on Angela Hill fights are 100% totally on. But when she loses and I pick her, it tends to be very, very close. And I don't really see how Jandiroba squeaks out a decision here. I think like the version of this fight that Jandiroba wins is I come in, I take the fight to the ground, I either finish you with a submission or I just dominate you on the ground. Like there's no real close squeaker version of this fight with Jandiroba winning. So I'm going with Angela Hill to outwork her, to do her thing. That being said, Angela Hill is 37 years old. We are kind of coming to the end of the road. But we'll see. I already broke down Carlos Candelaro versus Tetsuya Taira. Long answer short, I think Taira is the better prospect, but he has the standard Japanese problem where all of the individual skills are there. Like you ask him to throw a jab, it's good. You ask him to throw a leg kick, it's good. You ask him to throw a high kick, it's good. You ask him to put a combination together, it's good. You ask him to wrestle, it's good. You ask him to grapple, it's good. You ask him to show you a front headlock game, it's good. But then ask him to do any of that in combination, and like the game becomes incredibly janky without flow. And I can't pick that against Candelaro, who is a pretty good fighter, actually, I think. I said it. His path to the UFC has been very, very weird because I thought that he should have gotten the call after he beat Ronaldo Candido back in 2017 on Dana White's Contender Series, and he didn't. And then he got a second chance on the Contender Series, lost to Victor Altamirano, although I thought he won the fight, and now has gotten the call up, which is like the oddity and the stupidity of the Dana White Contender Series. I guess the fact that there is no inherent logic to the thing. Anyways, taking Candelaro, decision. Moving on to a fight that like part of my brain is like morbidly fascinated by, but part of my brain, the part of my brain that wants a good fight and an interesting thing to watch, is horrified by, and that's Nick Maximov versus Andre Petroski. And to be honest, actually, it goes a little bit deeper. I don't understand how either of these fighters developed. I really don't. So, in Nick Maximov's case, really in both cases, the answer is kind of like I was talking about with Tyra, the transitional game. It's not that they're bad at anything. It's that there is no flow to it. Like in Maximov's case, his big problem is he wants to wrestle out of a different stance than he wants to strike. So in order for him to transition from striking to wrestling or vice versa, he has to stance switch. And if you've noticed this, it's a massive giveaway because when he's in wrestling stance, he cannot strike worth anything. When he's in striking stance, he cannot shoot. That's a massive problem. Like, he's not a bad striker. He's not a particularly good striker. And he is actually a fairly decent wrestler. He is a fairly physical specimen. He is a pretty heavy top grappler. But there's just no transition between the two. Now, it's also incredibly weird because he's a Nate Diaz. I forget which one is directly training him. But the Diaz brothers are training this guy. And he has developed a style that I would like to call the complete anti-Diaz style. Like, you would think that if the Diaz brothers were to train a fighter, we would end up with the various kind of third Diaz brother ideas. Josh Neer, Jason Hick Diaz Knight. These guys who very much are the Diaz brothers, just not Diaz brothers. Maximov is like this positional-based leg-humping grappler. Like the exact thing that they hated when Sean Shirk did it to Nick. Or Gray Maynard did it to... not really, okay, Maynard's a better example. Try to think of a time when Diaz just got like dry humped. Nate. I can think of a lot of Nick ones, but ironically, I can't really think of one for Nate. But people have tried it against Nate repetitively, and they hate it. They honestly hate that. They hate the wrestlers. Yet Nick Maximov is totally what they hate, despite being their coach. He is the most confusing fighter on the roster. Legitimately the most confusing fighter. And then in the other corner, you got Andre Petroski. Petroski, again, very physical fighter. Powerful, strong, pretty reasonable at everything. But again, no transitional game. When he's striking, his feet are not going to the right spots to transition to any takedown. It's like if you watch his fight with Michael Gilmore, he'll be striking with Gilmore and he'll be bullying him on the feet. He'll be doing it. It's like, all right, this is the perfect time. His corner's calling takedown, takedown, takedown. And Michael Gilmore is not a very good fighter. He's not very physically adept. He's not terribly technical. And Petroski would like get this awkward half-ass shot off into his hips and like be stuck there for a bit. And he would eventually get the takedown because he's got that physicality advantage over Gilmore. But like it should have been instantaneous. And it just never was. I've not been impressed with Petroski's level of competition. Also, Petroski does tend to gas. He does tend to just, I don't know if it's an adrenaline dump or whatever. Because they did say on The Ultimate Fighter, it was on one of the more recent Ultimate Fighter seasons, I don't even remember which one, do not ask me. I've lost track of the Ultimate Fighter season since like a champion will be crowned, the first strawweight one. Like anything after that is like it's all just one big blob. Outside of I guess the featherweight and the heavyweight season, that kind of stands out, and then the first ever women's flyweight champion. Those two kind of stand out, but that's about it. And he did a cardio test and scored really, really high, like the highest on the team, I think. So it's like he's in great shape. He's got great lung capacity, but it does not translate to the cage. I was talking with someone about this, someone who has cardio issues when they fight and that I've trained with, but they're in great shape. Like, ask them to run a marathon or ask them to grapple for 60 minutes and they can do it without problem, but they gas out in fights. And I was actually talking to him about this probably about like 3 months ago. And we were discussing the role of like, his problem is that being in a fight feels way, way different to training. So I wonder if that's kind of the problem. Like, he's training, he doesn't feel stressed. He goes out in the cage and now the stress is there. The body is in fight or flight mode. And it just dumps adrenaline. I don't know what it is. Anyways, to the matchup itself. I've been talking about how really flawed both fighters are and how they both frustrate me and both confuse me. I'm picking Maximov. Why am I picking Maximov? Okay, so there's the gassing thing. There's the fact that Petroski does slowly gas out. But I have to say that Maximov, despite all of his flaws, still did beat Punahele Soriano, who's a pretty similar fighter to Petroski and a similar athletic specimen. We've not seen Petroski win a fight where he doesn't have a massive physical advantage. He's not going to have that here. We've seen Maximov actually beat fairly athletic fighters. Cody Brundrich, not a particularly amazing fighter, but is actually pretty physical. Punahele Soriano, not without his flaws, not without being a defensive mess, but is a pretty physical fighter. And this feels very similar to those two fights. You know, different enough that it's a new challenge and whatever. But it feels like Maximov should be somewhere above this, which does kind of like go back to like, all right, so conspiracy moment time here. There are a lot of people that will take the UFC side on like just about anything, and like they will often take the side on against the Diaz brothers as far as it is. Like, for example, Nate turned down Khamzat Chimaev. He is terrible. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Fighters turn down fights all the time. And it's also very, very obvious, I think, that the UFC is trying to damage Nate Diaz on the way out the door, because I think he has one fight left on his contract. They really wanted to fight Khamzat. Like, it's still on the war room wall, even though it's a fight that after Khamzat beat Gilbert Burns doesn't make any sense. But they still want that fight. Like, just do Khamzat versus Covington, please. I want it, desire it. I feel like this has got to be like just like kind of like just an indirect shot fired at them, because why is this the opening fight on the card? These two guys are a combined 4-0 in the UFC. Like, they're as flawed as they are actually prospects. They're below. Although, you know, I do look at this, and this card is actually pretty deep. Like, there's no can't miss fights necessarily, but it is actually a really deep card. There's not many debutants. There's Hadley, Torres, Tyro, and Candelaro. So there's only 4 debuting fighters. That's actually pretty nice. The only fight that I'm finding really weird is that right now, like, based on Tabology, and this may not be accurate, Camacho versus Torres is on the main card. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Almost every fight below it, save like the 2 debuting flyweights and like Hadley versus Nascimento, probably has a lot more meaning. Actually, no, do not put Michael Johnson and Alan Patrick on the main card. For the love of God, no, don't do that. But like Arujo Lee, bigger fight. Shandahoba Hill, bigger fight. Maximov, Petroski, bigger fight. So I don't know if this is just like a weird, like, get back at the DS. Anyways, Maximov, decision. Moving on. Bellator 281, MVP versus Logan Storley. I am not a big believer in MVP. And it's nothing to do with, like, the personality or whatever. He's kind of in the Conor McGregor boat of, like, I don't understand the appeal of his personality, but whatever. I think his fighting style is quirky. I think it's new. I think it is a breath of fresh air. But I think that if you look at anyone who's historically tried to take him down, they can take him down. And Logan Storley is a way better wrestler than anybody on that list. Could MVP knockout Story? Sure. Logan's got not the greatest defensive striking in the world. There are gaps there. He can be hit. He can be hit hard. But I think he's going to pressure Michael Venom Page, take him down, and probably submit him or finish him on the ground. And it'll probably be a way more. Might be a way more exciting fight if Venom can actually keep it standing. But I don't know. I'm not a big believer. I thought he lost to Douglas Lima the second time. I don't think it was a robbery. I think the rounds were close enough that you could justify a scorecard for him. But I do think Lima won. And then other than that, his biggest wins are like Derek Anderson and Shinzo Anzai and Paul Daly trying to wrestle. Like, no, Sean Burrell is actually a pretty decent win. I don't know. I'm not. Like Michael Venom Page, the other problem is like he's 35 years old. So like the time to develop him, if you were to develop him into like an actual like title contender, like not a freak show attraction, has come and gone, and they didn't do it. So I don't hate what they did with Venom Page. Like if you were just going to use him as a freak show event, go ahead. If it sells tickets, it sells tickets. I mean, Bellator needs to sell tickets, needs to establish people who can make money off of. Let's be honest. They're not the UFC. There's not an intrinsic. And even in the UFC, like I encourage them to like kind of have just like guys who exist outside the rankings metric, outside the structure of the system. I kind of just said it with Conor McGregor, that like he doesn't need a belt, so why wouldn't you just do fun, wacky fights with him? And like, you know, Page is the same thing, but he is getting a title shot, and he is probably going to lose. Lyoto Machida versus Fabian Edwards. The one thing I really, really dislike about Fabian Edwards leading into this fight is that he's kind of like trying to coach off the critiques and criticisms that if he beats Machida, he doesn't want Machida referred to as old. My man, Lyoto Machida is 43 years old. It doesn't matter if you want to be reminded that you beat an old man. You're fighting an old man. Get that through your head. I am actually still probably picking Machida. Machida doesn't look like he's like completely fallen off the deep end. Like he's not anywhere near as good as he used to be. He's not as snappy. He's not as powerful, not as fast, not as explosive. Age has definitely taken its toll. But like his durability is still there. He still is a confusing to fight fighter. And Edwards is fine. He's a good fighter, but I think maybe this is just me like looking at his loss to Austin Vanderfort and then watching Austin Vanderfort just get absolutely worked by Gegard Mousasi and going, that's a real bad sign. And that's honestly, that's probably what it comes down to. Denise Kyle Holtz versus Kana Watanabe. It's good fun. It's a fun idea fight. But I do think Kyle Holtz will win. She's pretty physically dominant. She's a good striker. I think she get the job done. And then Paul Daly will probably beat Wendell Giacomo, and Daniel Weichel will probably beat Robert Whiteford, and Oliver Encap will probably beat Mark Lemminger. And just to summarize those three fights, Daly's done. I'd like to see him retire, but he's probably still at the level to beat Giacomo. Sorry. Weichel is probably just a little bit too technically deep for Whiteford. I've always rather liked Robert Whiteford. I think he's an exciting fighter. I think he's a diversified fighter. I think he's a well-rounded fighter. I think he's a pretty deep fighter. But every time he's made a step up in competition, it's not really gone according to plan. And Weichel is a step up in competition. So there's that. How have they been doing lately? Daniel Weichel coming off the loss to Pedro Carvalho, beat Keone Diggs, lost to Emmanuel Sanchez, beat Saul Rogers. I forgot he beat Saul Rogers. Lost to Goto Yamamuchi and Patricio Pitbull. Yeah, he loses to like a really high level of competition that I just don't think Whiteford is. Also, Whiteford is 38 years old, and his biggest win is Sam Sicilia? Maybe Daniel Pineda. Maybe Daniel Pineda. So, yeah. And then Enkamp. I think Enkamp is actually a really talented fighter, to be honest. I think he just kind of can be easily flummoxed by wrestling. And it's not really what Mark Lemminger does a lot of the time. Tends to want to bang. Does grapple, but can be coerced into let me bang, bro. And yeah, I'm taking Enkamp. But I wouldn't be surprised if that goes the wrong way. Enkamp is kind of got a, I don't want to say an MVP style because it's like that's an oversimplification, but like he comes from that karate background that often does struggle to really translate into a successful MMA career. So that's Bellator. That's the UFC. That's my thoughts on the post pay-per-view stuff. Go watch Invicta. It was a good card. That's about it. I might be changing platforms here in the near future because Acast is doing some changes. Like, I'll still definitely be on YouTube, but like I'm going to probably look into trying to get on Spotify. See how that goes. So, the Facebook group and the Discord are in the description below, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Acast. Check that out for more details, and that'll be kind of how you keep up to date, so to speak. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I did. And I hope you enjoy the card because I think I will. So, you know, it's actually I'm going to say some actually really positive stuff here about the UFC's Fight Night card. It's pretty good. There's not a fight on there that is super predictable necessarily. Although Michael Johnson and Alan Patrick can go burn in a fire. And Petroski and Maximov possibly could have me ripping out what little is left of my hair. But still. The latter has meaning, and the former is at least potentially wonky.